Good evening, night owls. Tonight we have a collection of 5 of the scariest dark web stories we've told to date, each one a little more twisted than the last. You can find timestamps for each story down below in the description. Now, into the stories.
This tale is called "The Dark Web is Terrifying: My Experience." I'm a computer science major, so spending time on the internet is pretty much my life. I can navigate my way around almost any corner of the web, but what I stumbled upon a few weeks ago has changed my perception of the internet forever. It all started with an innocent curiosity about the dark web. You see, I had always been fascinated by the tales of the dark web. Stories of hidden marketplaces, secret forums, and bizarre websites that you could never imagine existing. One night, after finishing a particularly grueling assignment, I decided to dive into the murky waters of the dark web. I was careful, using a virtual machine and Tor browser to mask my identity and IP address. I knew the risks, and I was prepared to take them, or so I thought. After browsing through various forums and sketchy marketplaces, I came across a link titled "The Watchers." The name intrigued me, so I clicked on it. The site was minimalistic, with a dark background and white text. It looked almost like an old-school BBS, bulletin board system, a relic from the early days of the internet. There was a login page with a message that read, "Enter if you dare." I was hooked. I had to know what was behind that login screen. After some digging through dark web forums, I found a username and password. With my heart racing, I typed in the credentials and hit enter. The page that loaded next made my blood run cold. It was a live stream of various feeds, people's living rooms, bedrooms, offices, and even public places. The feeds were being captured either from cameras that had been hacked into or by people who were actually there, hiding and filming. I recognized some of the streaming sources: cheap IP cameras that were notoriously vulnerable, and even high-end security systems. I knew enough about tech to understand how these could be compromised, but seeing it in action was horrifying. As I watched in morbid fascination, a chat box popped up on the side of the screen. People were chatting, but it wasn't the usual internet banter. They were discussing the people in the videos, making bets on their actions, and sending in tributations. The term was new to me, but it didn't take long to figure out what it meant. Tributations were donations that resulted in something awful happening to the people being filmed. The higher the tributation, the more severe the action. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was like a twisted version of a reality show, but with real people who had no idea they were being watched. And the viewers were not just passive observers. They were actively participating in the torment of these unsuspecting victims. Over the next few days, I couldn't get the sight out of my mind. I tried to convince myself that it was just a sick prank, that the people in the videos were actors. But deep down, I knew it was real. I had seen the fear in their eyes, the confusion as they tried to understand why strange things were happening to them. I needed to know more, even though every fiber of my being told me to stay away. I started spending more time on the site, watching the feeds and reading the chat. The community was small but active, and they all seemed to know each other. They used pseudonyms and talked in a way that suggested they had been doing this for a long time. There were references to past events, to people who had disappeared from the feeds, and to new targets being lined up. One night, I saw something that made my stomach turn. A new feed had been added, and it was someone I knew, my classmate, Lisa. She was a quiet girl, kept to herself mostly, but she was always kind to me. Seeing her on that screen, completely unaware of the hundreds of eyes watching her every move, made me sick. I wanted to warn her, to tell her to get out of her house and never come back. But how could I explain how I knew? How could I protect her without exposing myself? The chat was buzzing with excitement. Someone had sent in a large tributation, and the action was about to start. I watched in horror as a masked figure appeared on the screen, creeping into Lisa's house. He moved silently, his movements deliberate and controlled. The chat was filled with comments, encouraging him, urging him on. Do it! Make her scream! This is going to be epic. I couldn't take it anymore. I shut my laptop and threw it across the room. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding. I felt helpless, trapped in a nightmare that I couldn't escape from. I knew I had to do something, but what? If I went to the police, they might not believe me. And even if they did, how could they find these people on the dark web? I barely slept that night. When I did, my dreams were filled with images of Lisa, of the masked figure, and of the chat filled with bloodthirsty comments. I woke up, determined to do something, anything, to stop this madness. I decided to go to Lisa's house. I had to warn her, even if it meant exposing myself. As I drove, I rehearsed what I would say, how I would explain everything. But when I got there, I found the house dark and silent. I knocked on the door, but there was no answer. I called her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Panic set in. What if I was too late? I drove to the nearest police station and told them everything. I showed them the site, the feeds, and the chat logs I had saved. At first, they were skeptical, but as I showed them more and more evidence, they started to take me seriously. They put out an alert for Lisa and sent officers to her house. A few hours later, they found her. She was alive, but barely. The masked figure had attacked her, just as I had seen on the feed. She was taken to the hospital, and I was left to answer the police's questions. They wanted to know everything: how I found the site, how long I had been watching, what I knew about the people involved. In the end, they were able to shut down the site and arrest several people connected to it. But the experience left me shattered. I couldn't go back to my old life, to my innocent curiosity about the dark web. I had seen the darkness that lurked there, the twisted minds that found pleasure in the suffering of others. Lisa recovered, but she was never the same. Neither was I. The scars of what we had been through ran deep, a constant reminder of the evil that exists in the world. I changed my major, moved to a new city, and tried to put it all behind me. But every time I hear the ping of a new message or the hum of a computer booting up, I remember. I remember the faces, the fear, and the knowledge that no matter how safe we think we are, there is always someone watching, waiting, ready to strike. Please, if you ever find yourself tempted to explore the dark web, think of this story. Think of Lisa and of the countless others who have suffered because of it. Some things are better left unseen, some doors better left unopened, and some sites, no matter how tempting, should never be visited.
This tale is called Bad Odds. I've always been a bit of a thrill seeker, not in the traditional sense, no skydiving or bungee jumping for me. My thrills came from the less obvious places, the pulse of a high-stakes poker game, the rush of placing a bet on a horse that no one else believed in, the dark alleys of the internet where rules were just suggestions. That's how I stumbled upon the dark web. I didn't go looking for it, not at first. It started innocently enough, as these things often do. I was on a losing streak with my regular betting sites, and the odds just weren't doing it for me anymore. I wanted something riskier, something more unpredictable. One late night, after too many drinks and not enough wins, I found myself on a forum where someone mentioned a place to get better odds on sports bets. They called it the hidden market. Curiosity got the better of me. I followed the breadcrumbs, one link leading to another, until I found myself in a place that felt different. It wasn't the kind of site you'd stumble upon by accident. I had to download Tor, the anonymous browser, and navigate through a maze of cryptic websites just to find the entrance. The hidden market was exactly what I was looking for. Higher stakes, bigger payouts, and all the anonymity I could ever want. At first, it was everything I had hoped for. I was winning more than I ever had before. The bets were risky, sure, but they paid off in ways that made my previous gambling habits feel like child's play. I started spending more and more time there, getting to know the other users. They were a strange bunch, people who thrived on secrecy, who lived for the adrenaline rush of betting it all on a hunch. We exchanged tips and strategies, but no one ever talked about who they really were. It was understood that identities were to remain hidden. It wasn't until a few weeks in that I noticed something odd. There was a section of the site that I hadn't noticed before, a small, nearly invisible link at the bottom of the page. It was labeled simply as the forum. At first, I didn't think much of it. Forums were everywhere on the internet, and I assumed this one was just a place for users to discuss their bets. But something about it intrigued me. The link felt out of place, almost like it was meant to be overlooked. One night, after a particularly big win, my curiosity got the better of me. I clicked on the link. The forum was, different. It wasn't about betting, at least not in the way I was used to. The threads were cryptic, full of vague titles like The Game or The Hunt. People talked about events, challenges and dares that went far beyond placing a bet on a football game. There was an intensity to the posts, a sense of something lurking just beneath the surface. It felt like I had stumbled into a place I wasn't supposed to be, like opening the door to a room where something dangerous was kept hidden. I should have left then. I should have closed my laptop and never looked back. But I didn't. Instead, I dove deeper. The deeper I went, the darker it got. I started seeing posts about the show, something the regulars seemed to treat with a mix of reverence and fear. People would share snippets of what they had seen, cryptic messages about performances, participants, and a host who was only ever referred to as the conductor. The more I read, the more uneasy I felt, but it was like a car crash I couldn't look away from. I started noticing changes in myself. I became obsessed with the forum, spending hours sifting through old threads, trying to piece together what the show was. Sleep eluded me, my work suffered, and I began to isolate myself from friends and family. All I could think about was the darkness I had uncovered, the secrets I wasn't supposed to know. Eventually, I found a post with a link. It was buried deep within a thread that hadn't been active for months, the kind of thread that should have been long forgotten. The link was unmarked, with no description or warnings, just a series of random numbers and letters. Against my better judgment, I clicked on it. The screen went black for a moment, and I thought my computer had crashed. But then the video started playing. It was grainy and low quality, the kind of footage you'd expect from an old security camera. The angle was odd, tilted slightly as if the camera had been placed on a ledge and left to run. The setting was a small, dimly lit room with a single chair in the center. A man was tied to the chair, his head slumped forward, his body motionless. I couldn't tell if he was alive or dead. Then the door to the room opened. A figure stepped in, dressed in black from head to toe, their face hidden behind a featureless mask. They moved with a slow, deliberate grace, circling the man in the chair like a predator, sizing up its prey. For a long moment, nothing happened. The figure just stood there staring down at the man. And then the screaming started. I wish I could tell you that I turned it off then, that I had the sense to walk away, but I didn't. I watched as the figure began to torment the man in the chair, using tools and methods that I can't bring myself to describe. The video lasted for hours, and by the time it ended, I was shaking, my mind numb with horror. I closed the laptop and tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw that room, that chair, that masked figure. I couldn't escape it. It was like the darkness from the forum had seeped into my soul, and no amount of light could chase it away. Over the next few days, I tried to forget what I had seen, but the forum kept pulling me back. I would find myself staring at the link, my hand hovering over the mouse, wanting to click, but knowing that I shouldn't. Eventually, I couldn't resist. I returned, desperate to understand what I had stumbled upon. That's when I started receiving messages. They were short, terse commands, urging me to watch more videos, to participate in discussions to prove my loyalty. I ignored them at first, but they kept coming, more insistent, more threatening. One night, I received a message that chilled me to the bone. It was a picture of my house, taken from outside my window. The caption was simple: "You're one of us now." I tried to disconnect, to leave the forum and the hidden market behind, but it was too late. They had their hooks in me, and they weren't going to let go. I started seeing shadows in the corners of my vision, hearing whispers when I was alone. My phone would ring at odd hours, and when I answered, there would be nothing but silence on the other end. I was being watched, and no matter what I did, I couldn't escape it. I don't know how much longer I can hold out. Every day, I feel myself slipping further into the darkness, losing pieces of who I used to be. The forum has become an obsession, a black hole that's swallowing me whole. I don't know what they want from me, but I can feel them closing in. If you're reading this, stay away from the dark web. It's not worth the thrill. Some doors should never be opened, and once you step through, there's no going back. I don't know how much time I have left, but I can feel it coming. The conductor is calling, and I'm not sure I can resist the pull any longer. If you hear a knock on your door late at night, don't answer. Don't look out the window, just turn off the lights, lock your doors, and pray that the forum hasn't found you too.
This deep web tale is called The Night Shift.
I've always been fascinated by the internet, its vastness, and its potential for discovery. Growing up, I was the kid who stayed up all night tinkering with old computers, diving into obscure forums and learning everything I could about the digital world. It started as a hobby, but as I got older, it became a passion. By day, I worked a mundane IT job, fixing printers and resetting passwords for frustrated colleagues. But by night, I was a digital explorer, venturing into corners of the internet most people didn't even know existed. At first, my deep web excursions were relatively harmless. I found communities discussing rare books, underground music scenes, and vintage software archives. These spaces were fascinating in their own right, filled with enthusiasts who shared my love for the obscure and the forgotten. But as time went on, my curiosity drove me to delve deeper, to explore the darker side of the internet, the infamous deep web. The deep web, shrouded in mystery and often sensationalized in popular media, is essentially a hidden part of the internet that isn't indexed by traditional search engines. It requires special software, like Tor, to access. I was drawn to it not because I wanted to find anything illicit, but because I was intrigued by the unknown. It was like a digital frontier waiting to be explored. For months, I browsed various forums and chat rooms, most of which were fairly innocuous. I read about conspiracy theories, urban legends, and even stumbled upon a few online marketplaces selling rare collectibles. But then,
One fateful night, I clicked on a link that would change everything. It was a simple, unassuming hyperlink buried in a discussion thread on one of the forums I frequented. The link led me to a place called the Night Shift. At first glance, the Night Shift didn't seem particularly out of the ordinary. It was a forum, much like any other, with posts and threads on various topics. But as I scrolled through the posts, I realized this was no ordinary community. The forum was dedicated to terrorizing delivery drivers. The posts were filled with detailed accounts of harassment, pranks, and even assaults. The members took great pleasure in sharing their exploits, encouraging each other to go further with each new post. My stomach turned as I read through the threads, each one more disturbing than the last. Members boasted about ambushing delivery drivers, stealing packages, and setting elaborate traps. They shared videos and photos of their pranks, many of which were downright cruel. It was clear that these people derived a sick sense of satisfaction from causing others pain and distress. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. How could anyone find joy in terrorizing innocent people who were just trying to do their jobs? My mind raced as I tried to comprehend the sheer malice of these individuals. I knew I had stumbled upon something truly sinister, something that needed to be stopped. But as much as the content horrified me, I couldn't tear myself away from the screen. I kept reading, compelled by a morbid curiosity and a growing sense of anger. I wanted to understand these people, to figure out what drove them to such cruelty. But more than anything, I wanted to see if there was a way to put an end to their reign of terror. The more I read, the more my anger grew. I felt a burning desire to do something, to take action against these monsters. But I knew I had to be careful. The deep web was a dangerous place, and drawing attention to myself could have serious consequences. I needed to be smart, to find a way to expose these people without putting myself at risk. And so I continued to browse the Night Shift, trying to gather as much information as I could. I took notes, saved screenshots, and documented everything I found. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do with this information, but I knew I couldn't just sit back and do nothing. One night, as I was scrolling through the forum, I came across a particularly disturbing thread. The title was simple: Tonight's Special Event. Intrigued and horrified, I clicked on the thread and began to read. The post described a live stream that was scheduled to take place later that night. The members were buzzing with excitement, hinting at something big, something truly awful. My heart raced as I read the comments. Whatever was going to happen, it was clear that it was going to be bad. I knew I had to see it for myself, to understand the full extent of what these people were capable of. But I also knew that by watching, I would be exposing myself to unimaginable horrors. Despite my fear, I decided to join the live stream. I had to know what these people were planning, and I had to find a way to stop them. Little did I know that what I was about to witness would haunt me for the rest of my life. Part 2. The anticipation of the live stream made the minutes crawl by like hours. I sat at my desk, my laptop open, a sense of dread building in the pit of my stomach. The clock struck midnight, and I refreshed the thread to see a new post. The link to the live stream had been posted. My heart pounded as I hesitated, knowing that clicking that link could open a Pandora's box of horrors. But my curiosity and desire for justice won out. I clicked. The live stream window opened to a dark, grainy video feed. The camera seemed to be positioned inside a dimly lit room, perhaps an old basement or warehouse. The chat on the side of the stream was buzzing with excitement. Usernames flew by, each more unsettling than the last, all eagerly anticipating whatever was about to happen. I steeled myself, taking deep breaths as I watched the screen. Minutes passed in eerie silence. The tension in the chat was palpable. Suddenly, the video feed shifted, and the camera focused on a man tied to a chair. He was blindfolded, his face contorted in fear. My stomach churned as I realized what I was witnessing. This wasn't a prank. This was something far more sinister. The chat erupted in a flurry of comments, some encouraging the unseen perpetrators, others making sick jokes. I felt a surge of anger and disgust. These were real people, delighting in the suffering of another human being. Without thinking, I typed a comment in the chat. "You sick bastards, what the hell is wrong with you?" The moment I hit enter, I regretted it. The chat slowed for a moment as if the users were taken aback by my outburst. Then, a new message appeared. "Well, well, looks like we have a hero here." My blood ran cold. The camera panned, and a masked figure stepped into the frame holding a large knife. They approached the man in the chair, who began to struggle and scream through his gag. Before I could process what was happening, another message popped up. "Why don't you join us, hero? Here's the invite." A link to a private chat room appeared. My hands trembled as I clicked on it, feeling like I had no choice but to follow this nightmare to its end. The private chat room was sparse, just a black screen and a text box. Then a message appeared. "Welcome, we've been expecting you." My heart raced as more messages followed, each one more menacing than the last. They knew who I was. They had my IP address, my location. They knew everything. "Do you like games?" one message read. "We have a special one just for you. Join the live stream again, hero. Watch and learn." I was paralyzed with fear, but I couldn't look away. I reopened the live stream, feeling a sense of dread wash over me. The camera had shifted again. This time, it was focused on a Ring doorbell recording. The address on the screen was mine. My blood turned to ice as I realized the gravity of the situation. They were outside my house. The chat in the live stream was going wild, the users egging on the masked figure who now stood at my front door. The video feed showed a delivery driver approaching, a package in hand. He looked confused, glancing around as if he felt something was off. The masked figure opened the door, and before the delivery driver could react, they attacked. I slammed my laptop shut, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew I had to act fast. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my hands shaking so badly I could barely press the buttons. When the operator answered, I blurted out everything, my words tumbling over each other in a frantic rush. I reported the live stream, the forum, the attack on the delivery driver, and the threat to my own life. The police arrived quickly, but by then the masked figure was gone. The delivery driver was nowhere to be found, and the live stream had been taken down. I gave the officers my statement, showed them the chat logs and the video feed, but there was little they could do. The deep web is a murky, anonymous place, and tracing those responsible was nearly impossible. Months have passed since that night, and I still haven't fully recovered. I moved to a new city, changed my name, and tried to start fresh. But the memory of that live stream haunts me. Every time I see a delivery driver, I feel a pang of guilt and fear. I wonder if they're safe, if they know about the monsters lurking in the shadows of the internet. I'm sharing this story now in the hopes that someone will listen, that someone will take action. The deep web is a dangerous place, and there are real people out there who take pleasure in causing harm. Be careful where you tread online, and if you ever come across something like the night shift, report it. You never know who might be watching. This next tale is called Dark Web Geocaching is Horrifying. 1 year ago today, I sold my laptop. I went an entire year with nothing but my older brother's old Nokia for technology after what I can only assume will forever be an event I seek intense therapy for. If you take anything from this story, I hope it's this. Stay off the fucking dark web. Growing up, I spent a lot of time on the internet, and I know that today that doesn't mean what it once did, but I was the kid that stayed up all night on crappy online forums, tinkering with avatars, font settings, and loads of other crap teenage me thought was the shit. Over time, I had my fair share of weird encounters, but I also made some close friends, some I even keep in touch with today. The internet was always a sketchy place, but it was also really fucking cool and full of a lot of really cool people. All that to say, I never would have ventured onto the dark web on my own accord, but even digitally, peer pressure's a bitch. It all started innocently enough. I was in a private chat with some old online friends, people I'd known since my forum days. One night, the conversation shifted to the dark web. They were talking about hidden forums, exclusive clubs, and pretty much all the stuff you hear about in a typical dark web creepypasta. Eventually, one of my old buddies suggested we install Tor and try it out for ourselves. I should have known better, but I was curious, and curiosity, as they say, killed the cat. It took 2 nights to get everyone's software and VPNs set up, and still be able to video call. One of us was on a MacBook, which made things twice as hard, and he eventually settled for phoning in from his iPad while he browsed on his laptop. We started off slow, visiting a large wiki that was filled with a long list of hyperlinks, most having no label and no sign as to where they led. Clicking the wrong link seemed like a risk I wasn't yet ready to take, so I pretty much sat idly until we all committed to a site we'd browse at the same time. Our thinking, while silly now looking back, was that if we all browsed the same site at one time, anybody attempting to mess with us or track our identities would be overwhelmed by so many visitors at one time. Even writing that just makes it sound all the more stupid, but I promise at the time it made way more sense. I guess we had the idea that the dark web was a lot harder to get onto than it was, and thought there was hardly any traffic across all the various sites. Again, I know it sounds stupid, but we were young and dumb. For a few hours, we visited various sites selling all kinds of strange shit and the occasional ARG-looking mess. Eventually, we ended up on a forum with a pretty active user base with 6 posts having been made in the last hour. We at first thought everyone was talking about geocaching. The threads were filled with cryptic messages and coordinates. It seemed like a twisted scavenger hunt, and we were intrigued. The forum was called The Hidden Cache, and the members spoke in riddles and codes. It was like nothing we had ever seen before. The more we browsed, the more curious we became, and then we saw a link next to a blinking red light. The live stream was dark and grainy, the camera positioned in what looked like an abandoned warehouse. The chat room was buzzing with excitement, users discussing the next cache and the potential rewards. I felt a thrill of anticipation, eager to see what would happen next. Then the stream shifted, the camera zooming in on a figure tied to a chair. He was dressed as if he'd been hiking and still had a fanny pack around his waist. My heart stopped as I realized what I was seeing. The man was blindfolded, his mouth gagged, and he was struggling against his bonds. The chat room erupted in cheers and jeers, the users egging on the person behind the camera. A hooded figure stepped into view, holding a knife. The man in the chair started thrashing, his muffled screams filling the air. The hooded figure raised the knife, and I watched in horror as they brought it down, the blade sinking into the man's chest. Blood sprayed, the man's screams turned to gurgles, and the chat room went wild. I sat there frozen in shock, unable to tear my eyes away from the screen. The hooded figure turned toward the camera. I was too scared. This was too much. It was at this point I realized I hadn't heard a word from anyone in the voice chat for over 5 minutes since we had joined the stream. I tabbed out to see the call disconnected. What the fuck? I tried rejoining, but suddenly heard my name. I tabbed back instantly, and my horrors were confirmed. The hooded figure again aired my name, this time asking, "What are you doing here? I'm fairly certain you weren't invited to our little viewing party tonight." That was it. I slammed my laptop shut and bolted down my stairs and out the door. Without a second thought, I lobbed the computer I had spent almost every night of the last 2 years of my life on into the air and watched as it smashed into what had to be 1,000 pieces on impact. I didn't stop running until I reached my neighbor's house. I frantically banged on the door, and when Mrs. Thompson opened it, she took one look at me and let me in without a word. She gave me a glass of water and a blanket, her concerned eyes asking questions I couldn't bring myself to answer. I mumbled something about a bad dream, and after a while I managed to calm down enough to thank her and head back home. But the fear stayed with me. For days I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the hooded figure and heard my name being called out in that eerie, mocking tone. My online friends were radio silent too. I texted, called, even tried to visit them in person, but it was like they'd vanished off the face of the earth. Weeks passed, and I started to convince myself it had all been some sick prank. Maybe the stream was staged, the chat logs faked, and the voice I'd heard was just a recording. The rational part of my brain clung to this explanation like a lifeline, but deep down, I knew the truth. The hidden cache was real, and I'd stumbled into something far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. I moved on, or at least tried to. I started using my brother's old Nokia, avoiding the internet as much as possible. It's been a year now, and I wanted to write this and try and get back online, even if it's just for basic stuff. I've gone deep enough with the internet, and these days just want to see some memes. This last story is called "This Dark Web Story Will Keep You Up at Night." I had always been fascinated by the dark web. Its labyrinthine network of hidden sites, accessible only through the Tor browser, felt like an underground kingdom where anything was possible. During my college years, it was a playground of forbidden knowledge and illicit goods, a place where I felt a rush of excitement mixed with the constant undercurrent of danger. The dark web was where I learned to navigate the shadowy corners of the internet, picking up skills that ranged from basic cryptography to the art of remaining anonymous. It was thrilling, a place where the rules of the surface web didn't apply, and I could explore the boundaries of my curiosity without restraint. Back then, I wasn't just a passive observer. I was actively involved in forums where people traded everything from hacked software to exotic drugs. It wasn't just about the transactions. It was the sense of community, the shared secrets, and the thrill of outsmarting the authorities. I had a pseudonym, Cypher Ghost, and under this alias, I felt invincible. My fellow dark web travelers and I exchanged tips on evading detection, shared stories about close calls, and even engaged in philosophical debates about the ethics of our activities. However, after graduating and settling into a mundane office job, the allure of that hidden world faded, overshadowed by the responsibilities of adulthood. The real world demanded my attention, rent to pay, a career to build, relationships to maintain. The adrenaline-fueled nights spent on the dark web were replaced by a 9-to-5 routine, and Cypher Ghost became a relic of my past, a reminder of a wilder, more carefree time. But a year after earning my degree, the monotony of everyday life became suffocating. The thrill of the unknown called to me once more, and I found myself diving back into the depths of the dark web. It started innocently enough, visiting old haunts, catching up on the latest chatter in forums I once frequented. The screen's dim glow felt like a portal to my past, and I was eager to reconnect with the thrill that had once made me feel so alive. Reactivating my old accounts, I was struck by how little had changed. The same aliases, the same cryptic conversations, the same aura of secrecy and danger. I navigated through familiar forums, greeted by usernames that had once been as familiar as my own. Shadowbroker, Nightcrawler, Spectre29, the list went on. It was like stepping into a time capsule, and I felt a rush of nostalgia mixed with an unsettling sense of foreboding. In one such forum, a thread caught my eye. A series of cryptic posts discussing a string of unsolved crimes in my city over the past year. The details were chillingly specific: abductions, disappearances, and even murders. Each post was a puzzle piece, a fragment of a larger, more sinister picture. The more I read, the more I realized these weren't just random crimes. They were interconnected, each one seemingly a piece of a larger puzzle. The forum buzzed with speculation. Some users claimed to have insider knowledge, while others dismissed the posts as elaborate hoaxes. But there was one user, Spectre29, whose comments stood out. His insights were disturbingly accurate, providing details that hadn't been made public. My curiosity piqued. I scoured my old chat logs,
trying to remember if I had ever interacted with this enigmatic figure. As I dug deeper, a sense of déjà vu washed over me. Buried in my archives, I found an old conversation from years ago. Spectre 29 had been a regular participant in a forum dedicated to drug exchanges. Back then, we had shared tips on anonymity, discussed our favorite suppliers, and even exchanged stories about close calls with law enforcement. The casual camaraderie we once shared now seemed ominous in light of his recent posts. Rereading our old chats, I noticed subtle hints and cryptic references that I had overlooked before. Spectre 29 often spoke of the perfect crime, a fantasy he claimed was purely hypothetical. But now, with the benefit of hindsight, his words took on a more sinister tone. My heart raced as I realized the chilling possibility. What if these crimes were his doing? Determined to uncover the truth, I meticulously combed through news reports, cross-referencing them with Spectre 29 OS posts. The more I investigated, the more connections I found. Each crime scene location, each victim's profile, matched the descriptions Spectre 29 had provided. My stomach churned as the pieces began to fall into place. I knew I had to confront him, but I needed more proof. Using my tech skills, I hacked into the forum's server logs, tracing Spectre 29A's IP address. It led me to a nondescript house in a quiet suburb, not far from where I lived. The realization that a killer had been lurking so close to home was both terrifying and galvanizing. Armed with my findings, I contacted the police, sharing everything I had uncovered. Initially skeptical, they eventually agreed to investigate. Days turned into weeks as I anxiously awaited news, the tension gnawing at my sanity. Finally, the breakthrough came. The police raided the house, but to my horror, found it empty. In his basement, they found a trove of evidence, photos, diaries, and detailed plans of his crimes. He had meticulously documented everything, a twisted homage to our old discussions. The media frenzy that followed was overwhelming. Our town was a quiet suburb, and something like this was unprecedented. News vans lined the streets, reporters clamoring for any scrap of information. My phone rang incessantly, with journalists eager for a statement. Friends, family, even old acquaintances reached out, their curiosity tinged with concern. As the days turned into weeks, the frenzy slowly subsided. Life in our town began to return to its normal rhythm. But for me, normalcy seemed like a distant memory. The knowledge that the person behind Spectre 29 was still out there haunted me. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow cast by the setting sun set my nerves on edge. Desperate for answers, I immersed myself in the evidence the police had recovered. Each photograph, each diary entry was a piece of a nightmarish puzzle. The man I had once chatted with so casually had transformed into a ghostly figure lurking in the peripheries of my consciousness. The realization that our conversations had been a catalyst for his crimes weighed heavily on my mind. I took a leave of absence from work, unable to focus on anything but the growing obsession with uncovering his whereabouts. I pored over every detail, trying to find a clue the police might have missed. His notes were meticulous, almost methodical in their precision. He had planned each crime with an eerie level of detail, his mind a twisted maze of malevolence. Late one night, as I sifted through yet another diary, I noticed a pattern. His entries often referenced places we had discussed in our chats, locations only someone familiar with our town would recognize. One name stood out: an abandoned factory on the outskirts of town, a place we had once joked about as the perfect hideout. With a mix of dread and determination, I decided to investigate. Armed with a flashlight and my old college baseball bat for protection, I drove to the factory. The building loomed in the darkness, its broken windows and rusted doors a testament to years of neglect. My heart pounded as I approached.
the weight of my mission pressing heavily on my shoulders. Inside, the factory was a maze of shadows and silence. I navigated the debris-strewn corridors, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind made me jump, but I pressed on, driven by a need for closure. In a back room, hidden beneath a pile of old crates, I found a makeshift living space. A sleeping bag, empty food containers, and a laptop sat amidst the clutter. My hands trembled as I opened the laptop, its screen illuminating the room with an eerie glow. It required a password, but my old skills came rushing back. Within minutes, I was in. The screen was filled with files, photos, documents, and chat logs. As I scrolled through them, I found recent entries. He had been here, watching, waiting. My blood ran cold as I realized he had been monitoring the police investigation, always one step ahead. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed through the factory. Panic surged through me as I quickly shut down the laptop and hid behind a crate. The footsteps grew louder, closer. I held my breath, the darkness closing in around me. A figure appeared in the doorway, silhouetted by the faint light from outside. He moved with a quiet confidence, his eyes scanning the room. It was him, the man behind Spectre 29. He had returned to his lair, unaware that I was hiding mere feet away. Adrenaline coursed through my veins as I watched him. He moved to the laptop, cursing under his breath when he found it shut down. He knew someone had been there. My mind raced, trying to formulate a plan. I couldn't let him escape again. Summoning every ounce of courage, I stepped out from my hiding place, brandishing the baseball bat. "It's over," I said, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. He turned, surprise flickering across his face before it was replaced with a sinister smile. "Cypher Ghost," he said, recognizing me instantly. "I wondered when you'd find me." We stood there, two ghosts from the dark web, our pasts colliding in the dim light of the abandoned factory. The air was thick with tension, the weight of our shared history pressing down on us. In that moment, I knew there was no turning back. This was the final chapter, and it was up to me to end it. With a sudden burst of energy, I lunged at him, swinging the bat with all my strength. He dodged, grabbing a rusted pipe from the floor. We circled each other, weapons raised, the silence of the factory shattered by the clash of metal against wood. The fight was brutal, a desperate struggle for survival, but in the end, my determination won out. With a final, bone-jarring swing, I knocked him to the ground. He lay there, unconscious, as I grabbed his laptop and ran. The police arrived minutes later, alerted by a call I had managed to make during the fight. They took the laptop and combed through the factory, but by then he was gone. The empty shell of the factory echoed with my failure. He had slipped through our fingers once more, a spectre vanishing into the night. The investigation dragged on for months, but no trace of him was ever found. The laptop yielded more evidence of his crimes, but no clues to his current whereabouts. It was as if he had vanished off the face of the earth. Life tried to return to normal, but I was never the same. Paranoia crept into every corner of my existence. I moved to a new apartment, changed my routines, but the fear lingered. I knew he was out there, watching, waiting for the right moment. The first package arrived a few months later. It was unmarked, with no return address. Inside, I found a photograph of myself taken from outside my new apartment. My blood ran cold. He had found me. The police could do little with the limited evidence, and the investigation stalled. The packages kept coming, sometimes weeks apart, sometimes months. Each one contained something personal, something only someone watching me closely would know. A ticket stub from a movie I'd seen, a piece of clothing I thought I'd lost. It was a game to him, a twisted cat-and-mouse chase. For 4 years, the packages arrived intermittently, each one a grim reminder that he was always close by. I changed addresses, even moved to another city, but nothing deterred him. Every time I thought I was safe, a new package would arrive.
resetting my anxiety. And then, one day, they stopped. Months passed without a single package. The silence was deafening, but I dared to hope that he had moved on, found a new obsession. It's been a year now since the last package arrived. The nightmares have lessened, the constant fear abating. I've started to rebuild my life piece by piece, but every now and then I catch myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see a shadow lurking in the distance. The dark web had taken its toll on me, and while I hoped it was over, a part of me knew that the shadows never truly disappear. They just wait, biding their time until the moment is right to emerge once more.
Thank you for listening to Tales from the Oak. We hope you enjoyed this video, whether it kept you up or put you to sleep. Let us know which story you found most mysterious down below, or drop a suggestion on types of stories you'd like in the future. Until next time, God bless.